April 18, 1943. 7:32 a.m. Kahili Airfield, southern Bougainville, Solomon Islands. The morning air is already thick with humidity clinging to uniforms and metal alike. Mitsubishi. A 6M3 Model 22 Zeros sit in disciplined rows along the coral strip, their long, graceful wings gleaming under a rising sun. The mechanics wipe oil from cowling seams and check the tension on control cables. Propellers twitch forward as ground crews pull chocks away. Captain Kenji Yanagiya of the 204th Air Group adjusts the strap of his leather flight helmet and squints toward the eastern horizon. The ocean lies beyond the jungle, invisible but omnipresent. He rolls his shoulders beneath his khaki flight suit and smirks at a junior pilot struggling to climb into his cockpit. "Remember," Yanagiya says over the rising whine of a Nakajima sake. 21 engine, the Americans cannot follow where we go." The younger pilot laughs nervously. "Hi, Captain. Their big twin-engine machine. It turns like a transport." He does not say its name with fear. He says it with mild amusement. Lockheed P-38. Lightning. In briefings over the past months, intelligence officers had described it as large, heavy, awkward. 2 engines mounted on twin booms, a central nacelle housing the pilot like a glass bead between metal forks. Too big for proper dogfighting. Too wide to maneuver in tight turns, a high-altitude interceptor perhaps useful over Europe, but here over the vast Pacific range was everything. And the Americans, they believed, never truly understood range. Commander Minoru Genda had once remarked during staff discussion that American fighters were short-legged creatures. They struck, then retreated. Japanese doctrine was built on distance and endurance, long over-water patrols, extended sweeps, calculated risk. The Zero's light frame and massive fuel capacity allowed Japanese pilots to choose when and where to fight. You can hear the engines building power now, each Zero vibrating against its brakes. The smell of aviation gasoline mixes with jungle rot. Radios crackle in clipped formal Japanese. Flight leaders report readiness. Section 1, ready. Section 2, ready. Yanagiya glances again eastward. For months, American aircraft have probed the Solomon Islands. Grumman, F-4A. Wildcats at first. Then newer F-6F Hellcats appearing in scattered encounters. And occasionally, more recently, the P-38. At first sight, it had seemed almost comical. The silhouette was unmistakable twin tails, long straight wings, central cockpit. It looked industrial, inelegant. Japanese pilots who engaged early lightnings reported that if you forced them into low-speed turning engagements, they bled energy quickly. They cannot match the Zero in a spiral. Lieutenant Saburo Sato had insisted after an early skirmish near Guadalcanal. Climb above them, dive through, and they scatter. Early encounters appeared manageable. American pilots often disengaged rather than commit to prolonged dogfights. They climbed away using their twin Allison V1 710 engines to gain altitude rather than contest a turning circle. Japanese after-action reports labeled the Lightning cautious, hesitant, respectful of Zero agility. That caution was interpreted as weakness. The briefing tent still echoes with laughter from earlier that morning. Intelligence officers had discussed American attempts to extend fighter escort range for bombers. There were rumors of auxiliary fuel tanks, drop tanks attached beneath wings or fuselage. Temporary solutions. Makeshift. External tanks are vulnerable, one staff officer had remarked. One burst of 20mm cannon fire and the aircraft becomes a torch. Confidence flowed easily. Far to the south over the open Pacific, a thin layer of high-altitude cirrus drifts lazily. Visibility is near perfect. Trade winds push light cloud formations inland. Ideal flying weather. At Rabaul's senior staff remain certain of their strategic advantage. The distances in this theater are immense. From American-held Guadalcanal to Bougainville is hundreds of miles over water. Escort fighters should not be able to accompany bombers that far without sacrificing combat performance. Distance is protection. That assumption rests like a quiet foundation beneath every operational plan. Back at Kahili, Captain Yanagiya climbs into his cockpit. He settles into the tight space, pulls the canopy forward, and signals thumbs up. The sake engine roars as throttle advances. The Zero lurches forward, tail lifting quickly as coral dust sprays behind. You feel the acceleration, the vibration through the airframe, the wind clawing at the canopy. One by one, the Zeros leap into the sky, banking northward in disciplined formation. Above 10,000 feet, the air cools. Sunlight reflects sharply off polished wings. Yanagia scans the horizon through his gun sight. No contacts, no contrails, only endless blue. He remembers his first encounter with the lightning months earlier. He had approached confidently from above, diving toward what he believed was an isolated American fighter. Instead of attempting to turn inside him, the P-38 pilot had rolled inverted and dived steeply, engines screaming, accelerating beyond easy pursuit. When Yanagia tried to follow his Zero's light frame began to buffet violently in the dive. He broke off. The American had not returned to fight. Cowardice, he had thought then. But something else lingered in memory, the speed. The lightning had accelerated in a way single-engine fighters rarely could. Still, doctrine prevailed. Japanese pilots trained for close, elegant maneuvering combat. They valued positioning energy, conservation discipline in formation. The Zero's lightness was its advantage. Heavy aircraft were at a disadvantage. Below, Bougainville's jungles ripple like a dark sea. The morning patrol remains uneventful. No American bombers, no wildcats, no lightnings. Radio chatter remains calm. At Rabaul, staff officers review reports from earlier weeks. Occasional P-38 sightings at surprising distances. American fighters appearing farther north than expected, but always in limited numbers. Harassment, not decisive threat. No one yet understands what is being tested. In the distance over the Pacific, faint contrails begin to form at extreme altitude, too far to notice, too high to concern. Twin-engine silhouettes move deliberately using altitude and fuel reserves that earlier versions did not possess. Inside briefing rooms across the theater, assumptions remain intact. The Zero still reigns in maneuver combat. The Americans are improving, yes, but slowly. Their aircraft are industrial solutions, not spiritual ones. Back over Kahili. Captain Yanagia banks gently westward. The patrol concludes without incident. Engines throttle back as the Zeros descend in formation. Wheels touch coral. Dust rises again. The calm feels earned, validated. At this moment, no one believes that distance itself is about to disappear as a shield. No one believes that the awkward twin-boom machine will soon appear not as a clumsy interloper, but as a hunter that does not tire, does not turn, does not need to. The morning ends in routine. Confidence remains unbroken. The weeks after that quiet April morning do not begin with catastrophe. They begin with anomalies. April 7th, 1943. 1:18 p.m. Over the central Solomon Sea. Lieutenant Commander Takashi Naito of the 251st Air Group tightens his grip on the control column of his Mitsubishi A-6M30 as sunlight flashes off something far above. The sky is deceptively empty. White cloud tops lie scattered below at 12,000 feet. He is leading a routine sweep north of Guadalcanal, confident in fuel calculations. Confident in distance. Then he hears it. Not the distinct high-pitched whine of a single radial engine. Two engines. Deeper. Smoother. Steady. He tilts his head, searching the blue expanse. At first he sees nothing. Then faint glints appear at extreme altitude, perhaps 25,000 feet or higher. They are not diving, they are not attacking, they are simply there. Unidentified twin-engine aircraft at high altitude, Naito reports over his Type 96 Model 3 radio set. Static crackles in response. The formation above does not descend to engage. Instead, it holds altitude, maintaining separation. Naito banks steeply and orders a climb. His Zero struggles past 20,000 feet. The air grows thin. The Sake engine loses some of its eager pull. The shapes above shift slightly, then begin to withdraw eastward. Not hurriedly, not chaotically, deliberately. The silhouettes are unmistakable. Lockheed P-38, Lightning. Back at Rabaul, the contact report is logged without urgency. American reconnaissance activity, perhaps escort testing. No bombers were present, no losses incurred. Yet, Fuel calculations disturb a junior intelligence officer reviewing the timing. The reported position lies near the limit of what previous American fighters could reach while maintaining combat margin. He approaches his superior cautiously. "Sir, the estimated distance from Guadalcanal to the interception point suggests extended range operations." The senior officer adjusts his spectacles and scans the map. "External tanks," he replies calmly. "Temporary extension." They will sacrifice maneuverability. The file is closed. April 12, 1943. 9:42 a.m. Northern, New Georgia Sound. A flight of Mitsubishi G4M1 Type 1 land-based attack bombers known to Allied forces as the Betty Cruises at 16,000 feet. Escorting Zeros fly slightly above and behind, scanning constantly. Weather is clear visibility, nearly unlimited. Without warning, tracers slash upward from above and behind. Bright white lines streak past the right wing of the lead bomber. A burst of 20mm cannon fire tears through the outer engine of the second G4M. The attacking aircraft does not attempt a turning duel. It passes through the formation at high speed, guns concentrated in its nose. All fire emerges in a tight stream, unlike the wing-mounted weapons of many fighters. Sergeant Hiroshi Tanabe, rear gunner in the trailing Betty, swivels frantically. He catches a glimpse of twin tails slicing across the sky. The lightning climbs sharply after the pass, both Allison engines roaring in unison. Two more follow behind it, maintaining formation discipline. The escorting Zeros dive to intercept, but the American fighters refuse to descend into a turning engagement. They climb again, regrouping above 25,000 feet. From that altitude, they make another coordinated diving pass. The attack is precise, brief, relentless. One G4M erupts in flame as fuel tanks ignite. Another limps southward, trailing smoke. Back at Kahili, Captain Kenji Yanagia studies the after-action report that afternoon. His jaw tightens. "They refused combat." "Yes, Captain. They would not turn. They attacked, climbed, then attacked again." Yanagia says nothing for several seconds. The Zero's advantage lies in turning engagements. If the enemy refuses that engagement, the rules change. Still, losses were limited. 2 bombers destroyed. Escorts survived. At Rabaul, operations officers analyze the encounter. The conclusion is measured. "The P-38 relies on speed and altitude," one staff officer remarks. "If forced low, it will falter. Our pilots must bait them downward." No formal doctrinal shift occurs. April 15, 1943. 6:05 a.m. Kahili briefing room. Intelligence officers present updated reconnaissance charts. American air activity is increasing around Guadalcanal. Patrol patterns extend farther north than previously recorded. Sightings of P-38 formations are becoming more frequent. A young naval liaison officer clears his throat. There is concern regarding the predictability of our inspection routes. He begins carefully. High-level American fighters have been observed near Bougainville more than once. The room quiets slightly. Captain Yanagia leans forward. "Are you suggesting they can escort bombers here consistently?" The liaison hesitates. "It appears possible under certain conditions." Murmurs ripple across the table. A senior operations commander responds sharply. "The distances remain extreme. Fuel reserves would limit combat duration. We retain interior lines. Do not exaggerate isolated sightings." The atmosphere shifts back toward reassurance. Yet in the skies, evidence continues to accumulate. On April the 16th, a reconnaissance Ki-46. Dinah reports being shadowed for over 30 minutes by 2 P-38s at high altitude north of Buka Passage. They do not attack. They simply follow at a distance as if measuring speed and reaction. The Dinah pilot notes their unusual steadiness. No oscillation, no wasted motion. On April the 17th, a small formation of Zeros attempting to intercept B-24 Liberators finds themselves surprised by lightning escorts that appear far beyond anticipated range. The engagement is brief but unsettling. The P-38s do not scatter. They operate in pairs, covering one another, climbing and diving with coordinated discipline. Back at Rabaul, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto prepares for an inspection tour of forward bases. His staff outlines travel routes with precision. Timing is exact. Escort plans are routine. Distance remains a silent assumption. No one in the planning room connects the increasing presence of P-38s at extreme range with a direct threat to high command movement. Confidence persists because collapse has not yet occurred. The lightning is still described in reports as heavy, less agile, dependent on altitude. But something subtle has changed. It no longer retreats immediately. It no longer avoids northern skies. It appears where calculations say it should not. On the evening of April 17th, Captain Yanagia stands outside his quarters at Kahili, watching the last light fade over Bougainville. The air hums with insects. Somewhere in the distance, engines are being serviced for tomorrow's flights. He recalls Naito's report, Tanabe's description of nose-mounted cannon fire, the repeated pattern of dive, climb, regroup. You can sense it building now, though. No one names it. The Americans are not probing randomly. They are measuring distance. They are measuring response time. They are learning routes. Inside operations rooms, maps remain unchanged. Assumptions remain intact. No order has been issued to alter travel plans or escort formations in response to the lightning's growing reach. Early warnings sit quietly in folders, unconnected, underestimated. At this moment, no one yet understands that these sightings are not harassment. They are rehearsal. April 18th, 1943. 7:05 a.m., Balale Airstrip, Shortland Islands. The morning humidity presses against the revetments carved into coral and packed earth. Mitsubishi, a 6M-30's idle in a tight defensive pattern near the runway. Ground crews wipe condensation from instrument panels and check ammunition belts feeding the twin-type 99 20mm cannons mounted in each wing. The air smells of fuel and wet jungle. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's inspection tour is underway. At 6 a.m., 2 Mitsubishi G-4M1 Type 1 attack bombers lifted from Rabaul, carrying the commander-in-chief of the combined fleet and his staff officers. 6 Zeros from the 204th Air Group serve as close escort, flying in disciplined formation above and behind the bombers. Timing is exact. The flight path is precise. Arrival at Balale is scheduled for 8 a.m. Commander Minoru Genda is not aboard, but his operational doctrines echo in every escort pilot's discipline. Formation integrity, constant scanning, fuel management. Lieutenant Junichi Sasai, flying high cover, adjusts his throttle and glances at his wristwatch. The formation is slightly ahead of schedule. Weather is ideal. Light trade winds, excellent visibility. Distance is protection. At 7:19 a.m., near the southern tip of Bougainville, Sasai's eyes narrow. High above the horizon, faint shapes appear where nothing should be. At first, they resemble small clouds. Then sunlight flashes off metal. He inhales sharply. Contrails, thin white lines cutting across deep blue at extreme altitude. He switches frequencies on his Type 96 radio. Static crackles. Unidentified aircraft at high altitude bearing 150. Below him, the twin G-4M bombers maintain steady speed, cruising at roughly 180 knots. Yamamoto sits inside the lead aircraft, reviewing notes for his address to base personnel. He is calm. The schedule is routine. Sasai banks slightly, straining upward. The shapes above grow clearer. Twin tails, long wings, Lockheed P-38. Lightning. They are not drifting. They are descending in coordinated formation. You can feel the shift in the air even before gunfire begins. Escort pilots tighten their grips. Throttles advance. The zero formation begins to climb, but the P-38s are already positioned above and slightly ahead. Major John W. Mitchell of the United States Army Air Forces leads the American formation. 16 P-38 G Lightnings from the 339th Fighter Squadron have flown nearly 400 miles at low altitude to avoid detection, then climbed sharply to intercept this precise point in the sky. Fuel gauges are tight. Calculations are exact. The Americans had not stumbled upon this route. They had been waiting for it. At 7:34 a.m., Mitchell pushes his throttle forward. Both Allison Feep 1710 engines roar in unison. The formation breaks into attack elements. First Lieutenant Rex T. Barber and First Lieutenant Thomas G. Lanphier, Jr. dive toward the bombers. The concentrated nose-mounted armament of the P-38 unleashes a stream of fire. One Hispano 20mm cannon and 450 caliber Browning machine guns discharge in tight convergence. The sound is violent, metallic, overwhelming. The escorting Zeros react instantly. Sasai dives hard to intercept. He attempts to force the American fighters into a turning engagement, but they refuse to flatten their attack. Barber's lightning closes on the lead G4M. Tracer rounds strike the right engine. Smoke erupts. Another burst tears through the fuselage. The bomber begins to roll. Inside, Admiral Yamamoto grips the armrest as the aircraft shudders violently. Flames lick across the wing root. The pilot attempts evasive maneuver, but the heavy bomber cannot outclimb the diving interceptor. The G4M plunges toward the jungle below. Lanphier engages one of the escorting Zeros in a brief exchange, but the Americans do not linger. Their objective is singular. The second G4M attempts to escape southward. Captain Hiroshi Minaguchi banks sharply, trying to shield it. He fires a burst from his Type 99 cannons, striking one Lightning's outer boom. The American fighter shudders, but remains intact. Another P-38 swings behind the trailing bomber. Guns flash again. The Betty begins trailing smoke, then descends rapidly toward the coastline. In less than 4 minutes, the sky transforms from calm formation flight to chaos. The Zeros attempt to regroup. Sasai dives after a climbing Lightning, but the American pulls steeply upward, both engines delivering power beyond what a single Sake radial can sustain at that altitude. The Zeros climb slows. The P-38 rolls over the top and dives away. The engagement fragments into isolated pursuits. The Americans maintain pairs covering one another. They avoid tight turning spirals. They refuse to be drawn low. Below, black smoke rises from Bougainville's jungle canopy where the lead G4M has crashed. Inside Balale Operations Hut, radio operators stare at their sets in disbelief as fragmented transmissions pour in. Enemy fighters. Twin engine. Interception successful. Bomber hit, descending. The schedule dissolves. Captain Kenji Yanagia, scrambling from Balale to respond, sees the smoke column before he hears the full report. His Zero lifts into the air, but the P-38s are already withdrawing eastward. They do not flee in panic. They depart on schedule. Fuel calculations demand it. Sasai levels off at 18,000 feet and watches the American formation recede. The twin booms shrink against the vast Pacific sky. They have traveled farther than expected. They have struck precisely, and they are leaving before extended engagement can trap them. You can sense it in the silence that follows. This was not random contact. This was interception at a point previously considered unreachable. Back at Rabaul, the confirmation reaches headquarters shortly after 9 a.m. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto is dead. The room falls still. No one speaks for several seconds. Maps on the walls suddenly seem fragile. An intelligence officer whispers the unthinkable. They reached Bougainville. Distance has failed. The awkward heavy fighter, dismissed months earlier, has crossed hundreds of miles of open ocean, climbed above escort altitude, and executed a timed attack with surgical precision. Captain Yanagia lands at Bayale in heavy silence. He removes his helmet slowly. Around him, ground crews stand motionless. The sky above Bougainville looks the same as it did at dawn. Blue, wide, endless. But something fundamental has shifted. The Lightning has proven it can appear where escape was assumed, and this was only the first undeniable demonstration. April 19, 1943. 6:40 a.m. Rabaul Naval Headquarters. The air inside the operations room is heavy, unmoving. Windows remain open to the humid morning, but no breeze enters. Maps of the Solomon Islands cover the walls marked with colored pins and grease pencil lines indicating patrol routes, supply convoys, inspection schedules. Yesterday's annotations remain visible, but the central fact now eclipses all markings. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto is dead. Vice Admiral Junichi Kusaka, stands at the head of the long table, his hands resting flat against the wood. His uniform is immaculate, his face is composed, but the officers seated before him cannot hide their disbelief. "Report the confirmed timeline," Kusaka says quietly. A staff officer reads from a prepared sheet. "Departure from Rabaul at 0600 hours. Interception at approximately 0734 hours near the southern coast of Bougainville. 16 American twin-engine fighters identified as Lockheed P-38 Lightning. Estimated flight distance from Guadalcanal exceeds 400 statute miles." Silence follows the word exceeds. 400 miles. That number does not fit prior assumptions. Commander Hitoshi Miura, responsible for operational planning in the sector, adjusts his glasses and studies the map. Such range suggests significant fuel augmentation. External tanks likely employed. Kusaka nods slightly. And yet they maintain sufficient combat capacity. The room absorbs that contradiction. The earlier belief had been simple. If the Americans extended range, they would sacrifice maneuverability. If they carried additional fuel, they would be vulnerable. If they flew so far north, they would arrive depleted. But the interception had been executed with altitude advantage, coordinated attack elements, and disciplined withdrawal. Confidence had not collapsed overnight. Instead, it bends under pressure. April 20th, 1943. Kahili Airfield. Captain Kenji Yanagiya gathers his flight leaders beside a parked A6M3. The aluminum skin reflects harsh sunlight. Mechanics move quietly in the background. The P-38 is no longer to be treated as an occasional intruder. Yanagiya begins. They have demonstrated range beyond expectation. They climb well at high altitude and concentrate firepower in the nose. Avoid head-on approaches. Lieutenant Saburo Sato speaks carefully. "Captain, if we draw them low, their turning performance remains inferior." Yanagiya hesitates. "That belief remains attractive." "Yes," he replies. "But do not assume they will accept such engagement. They refuse prolonged turning combat. They attack, climb, and re-engage." Across the Solomon Sea, American squadrons are already studying the success of the mission. Major John W. Mitchell debriefs his pilots in detail. Fuel consumption, altitude profiles, navigation checkpoints, timing precision. The operation had depended on meticulous dead reckoning navigation at low altitude to avoid radar detection, then rapid climb to intercept altitude at exactly the calculated moment. The lesson for the Americans is not merely that the mission succeeded. It is that the P-38 can project power across distance once considered prohibitive. April 23rd, 1943. 2:15 p.m. Northern Solomon Islands. A formation of Japanese transport aircraft attempts routine movement between bases under light escort. Weather conditions are moderate scattered cumulus clouds at 10,000 feet. Suddenly, contrails appear again. P-38 Lightnings dive from altitude with measured aggression. They do not charge recklessly. They select targets deliberately. A transport bursts into flame within seconds of concentrated cannon fire. Escort Zeros scramble upward, but the Americans maintain vertical separation. One Lightning breaks downward in a steep diving attack, then climbs sharply with engines roaring in synchronized power. The Zeros attempt pursuit, but at high speed in a dive, the Zero's light structure begins to shudder violently. Several pilots break off to avoid structural stress. After only minutes, the P-38 formation regroups and withdraws eastward. Losses are modest. Impact is psychological. Back at Rabaul, cumulative reports form a pattern. Sightings north of New Georgia. Sightings near Bougainville. Sightings even approaching Buka Passage. Distance is no longer protection, yet strategic planning hesitates to fully adjust. The combined fleet remains stretched across vast oceanic fronts. Carrier aviation has suffered attrition. Land-based air groups compensate as best they can. Some officers argue that Yamamoto's loss was an extraordinary intelligence breach rather than proof of sustained reach. They possessed our travel schedule, one senior commander insists. That is the core failure. Others quietly recognize a deeper vulnerability. If American fighters can escort bombers farther north, if they can patrol at altitude over key transit routes, then inspection tours, supply movements, and reinforcement flights are no longer shielded by geography. May 1st, 1943, 10:08 a.m. Over the Solomon Sea, a mixed formation of Japanese Zeros and dive bombers encounters a larger group of P-38 Lightnings at 24,000 feet. The Americans initiate combat with controlled diving passes. Their nose-mounted armament delivers concentrated bursts that shred a dive bomber's wing in seconds. Captain Yanagiya engages one Lightning in a climbing turn. He attempts to force the American into horizontal maneuver. The P-38 resists, instead climbing steeply in a zoom maneuver. Its twin engines maintain power at altitude where the Zero begins to struggle. Yanagiya's breath shortens inside his oxygen mask. The Lightning rolls over the top and dives behind him. Tracers streak past his canopy. He banks hard, narrowly escaping. The engagement lasts less than 10 minutes. The Americans depart before fuel margins demand risk. Back at Kahili, maintenance crews examine bullet strikes on returning Zeros. Damage patterns reveal tight groupings consistent with centralized armament. Unlike wing-mounted guns that require convergence distance, the Lightning's nose configuration allows accurate fire from farther range. Technical details now matter. Allison. 51710 engines equipped with turbo superchargers maintain performance at higher altitude than previously appreciated. Drop tanks extend operational radius significantly. Discipline in paired tactics limits vulnerability. These are not improvisations, they are systemic improvements. Within Japanese briefings, tone shifts subtly. The P-38 is no longer dismissed openly. It is described as dangerous at altitude, fast in the dive, capable of extended escort. But doctrine does not transform overnight. Training pipelines cannot accelerate instantly. Fuel shortages constrain practice at high altitude. Replacement pilots arrive with fewer hours. The escalation continues gradually, almost quietly. By late May, American bombers operating from Guadalcanal begin appearing over targets once considered safely beyond fighter escort. Zeros scramble more frequently. Fatigue increases. Every time contrails appear where they should not, the earlier assumption erodes further. The Lightning does not need to turn inside the Zero. It only needs to appear where it was never expected. And now it does. May 15th, 1943. 4:52 a.m. Kahili Airfield, Bougainville. The sky is still dark, faint violet at the edges. Mechanics move with hooded lanterns, checking oil lines and tightening fasteners on Mitsubishi. A 6 M30s lined along the coral strip. The engines cough, awake one by one, propellers slicing the humid dawn air. Pilots climb into cockpits in near silence. No one jokes anymore about twin tails. Captain Kenji Yanagiya stands beside his aircraft reviewing the latest operational bulletin. American bomber activity has increased steadily. More troubling is the pattern heavy bombers now appear north of New Georgia with consistent fighter escort. Not occasionally, consistently. He folds the paper and climbs into his Zero. At 5:20 a.m., radar operators at Buka detect inbound contacts approaching from the southeast at high altitude. Range estimates are precise. The American formation is large. Enemy bombers, altitude 24,000 feet. Escort present. Yanagiya's formation lifts into the pale sky. 12 Zeros climb aggressively, engines straining as they approach 20,000 feet. The air grows thin. Oxygen masks secure tightly against faces. Above them, contrails mark the bombers. And above the bombers, smaller contrails arc outward in protective pattern. Lockheed P-38. Lightnings. The Americans have learned. The escort is not merely attached to the bombers. It floats above, layered in altitude, ready to dive on interceptors. As Yanagiya approaches firing range, a pair of P-38s peels downward in perfect coordination. They do not wait for the Zeros to commit. They strike first. The engagement fractures instantly. Lieutenant Saburo Sato attempts a climbing spiral to force one Lightning into turning combat. The American refuses. Instead, he pulls upward in a steep climb, using engine power to gain vertical separation. A second Lightning dives from above, guns blazing. Concentrated nose fire tears through Sato's wing root. His Zero rolls uncontrollably and disappears into cloud. You can feel the shift in that moment. Not panic, not yet, but recognition. The P-38 is dictating altitude. Yanagiya banks hard and dives on a lightning that has just fired. He squeezes the trigger. His Type 99 cannons flash. The American fighter absorbs hits along one boom but continues climbing, engines roaring with mechanical steadiness. The Zero struggles to follow beyond 25,000 feet. Engine output drops. The Lightning rolls over at the apex and dives away at speed impossible to match safely. Below, American B-24. Liberators maintain formation, bomb, bay doors open. Explosions ripple across Kahili's runway minutes later. Fuel dumps ignite. Smoke rises in thick columns. The Zeros cannot remain to contest endlessly. Fuel margins narrow quickly during high-altitude combat. The P-38s operating with extended tanks and calculated burn rates maintain longer presence. When Yanagiya lands coral dust rising behind his wheels, he sees flames still licking at damaged hangars. Ground crews scramble to contain spreading fires. In the operations hut, reports arrive in rapid succession. 2 Zeros missing. 1 severely damaged. Runway cratered. Fuel storage compromised. The American escort did not break off early. They stayed. At Rabaul, Vice Admiral Kusaka reviews similar reports from multiple fields across the northern Solomons. Patterns are undeniable now. American fighters are escorting bombers to distances once reserved for unescorted operations. They are arriving with altitude advantage. They are departing on schedule. Commander Hitoshi Miura speaks carefully during the briefing. Previous assessments underestimated the operational radius of the P-38 equipped with auxiliary fuel tanks. Turbo supercharger performance at altitude provides sustained power beyond expectations. No one laughs at the technical explanation. Another officer adds quietly, "We assumed they would sacrifice maneuverability for range. They have sacrificed neither." Silence fills the room. The turning point is not a single battle. It is accumulation. May 25, 1943. 1:07 p.m. over Bougainville Strait. A mixed Japanese strike force attempts retaliation against Allied shipping near Guadalcanal. Intelligence suggests limited fighter presence. As the formation approaches mid-route, contrails form again above. The P-38 escort arrives before Japanese aircraft reach target. The Americans have reversed initiative. Zeros are forced into defensive posture. Bombers jettison ordnance prematurely to lighten weight. Engagement becomes survival rather than strike. One by one, Japanese aircraft fall to concentrated bursts from lightning nose guns. The Americans maintain disciplined pairs, each covering the other's blind spot. Captain Yanagiya watches a fellow pilot spiral downward, trailing smoke. He attempts pursuit of the attacking lightning but cannot close the distance in level flight. He realizes something he does not voice. The P-38 no longer needs to chase. It waits. Back at Kahili that evening, maintenance officers review aircraft availability. Spare parts are limited. Replacement pilots are arriving with fewer training hours. High-altitude combat experience is scarce. Doctrine meetings grow tense. Some senior officers still argue that proper tactics can neutralize the lightning. Force low-altitude engagement. Bait into turns, concentrate numbers, but numbers are thinning, and the Americans are choosing when to fight. June approaches with steady pressure. Bombing runs increase in frequency. Escort strength remains robust. In private conversation, Lieutenant Commander Naito voices what others hesitate to admit. "We believed distance was armor," he says quietly to Yanagiya. "It is no longer armor." Yanagiya does not respond immediately. He stares at the dark horizon beyond the airfield. The Zero remains elegant, agile, deadly in skilled hands. But elegance cannot compensate for an enemy that appears without warning at altitude with endurance. The moment no one wanted to admit has arrived. The P-38 is not a nuisance. It is control of the sky above the Solomons, and control is slipping. June 10, 1943. 3:18 p.m., Rabaul Naval Headquarters. Rain lashes against the corrugated metal roof. Inside the operations room, cigarette smoke hangs thick beneath hanging lamps. Maps of the Solomon Islands are crowded with new markings. Red grease pencil circles expand farther north than they did in April. Vice Admiral Junichi Kusaka stands rigid before the table as reports accumulate. Kahili runway under repeated attack. Buka fuel storage struck again. Enemy fighter presence confirmed over Bougainville Strait for 40 minutes. 40 minutes. That duration alone unsettles the staff. Commander Hitoshi Miura runs a finger along a chart indicating estimated American fuel capacity. With external tanks, the P-38G can operate beyond 400 miles and retain engagement time. Their withdrawal patterns are precise. They calculate return margin carefully. A younger officer interjects voice, tight. Then our forward bases are no longer forward, they are exposed. The room absorbs that truth. Shock does not come as shouting. It comes as quiet recalculation. June 14th, 1943. 11:07 a.m., Kahili Airfield. Captain Kenji Yanagiya wipes rain from his goggles before climbing into his Zero. The airfield is scarred. Craters fill sections of coral runway. Temporary repairs patch holes with compacted debris. Fuel reserves are rationed. Radar reports incoming bombers at high altitude. Yanagiya leads 8 Zeros into a steep climb. Clouds obscure visibility at 18,000 feet. Moisture beads on canopy glass. Radio static crackles through the Type 96 set. Suddenly, a P-38 formation breaks through cloud above them. The Americans are higher. They dive immediately. The first pass shreds a Zero before its pilot even sees the attacker. Concentrated nose fire leaves no need for convergence adjustments. The Lightning climbs away in a smooth arc, engines synchronized in relentless power. Yanagiya banks hard and attempts pursuit. The American fighter does not turn flat. It pulls upward again, vertical separation widening. Another Lightning dives from the opposite side, forcing Yanagiya defensive. Bomb explosions ripple across Kahili moments later. Smoke engulfs the southern dispersal area. On landing, Yanagiya steps from his cockpit into chaos. Ground crews rush toward burning aircraft. Medical personnel carry a wounded pilot toward a field station. Lieutenant Junichi Sasai approaches him, helmet under his arm. "They remain above us," Sasai says quietly. "Always above." Yanagiya nods once. Back at Rabaul, desperate measures are debated. Fuel shortages limit high-altitude training hours for replacement pilots. The industrial base cannot rapidly produce advanced interceptors comparable in range. The Zero remains the primary fighter, but its design priorities emphasize maneuver over durability and high-altitude performance. A proposal emerges to stagger inspection routes and vary transit times unpredictably. Another suggests reducing daylight movements entirely. "These are defensive adjustments," one officer remarks bitterly. "We are reacting." Shock transforms into confusion when intelligence estimates reveal that American forces now operate multiple P-38 squadrons in the theater. The Lightning is not a singular anomaly. It is becoming a persistent presence. June 21st, 1943. 2:44 p.m. Over the Solomon Sea. A formation of Japanese dive bombers attempts to intercept Allied shipping reports near Rendova. Escort Zeros climb aggressively to meet expected resistance. Instead of encountering scattered wildcats, they find layered formations of P-38 Lightnings positioned above the shipping lanes. The Americans strike first. Dive bombers are forced to break formation prematurely. Some jettison bombs into open water to gain speed. The mission objective collapses before reaching target. In the ensuing engagement, Lieutenant Saburo Sato's replacement, a young pilot with limited combat hours, attempts to pursue a Lightning in a steep dive. The Zero's airframe begins to buffet violently. He pulls out too late. Structural stress tears part of his wing. He spirals into the sea without enemy fire ever striking him. Desperate decisions begin to replace calculated doctrine. Orders are issued to concentrate more Zeros per interception. Larger formations, tighter escort patterns. But fuel remains limited. Maintenance crews work without pause. Replacement aircraft arrive slowly. Pilots rotate through missions with minimal rest. June 28th, 1943. 6:03 a.m. Rabaul. Vice Admiral Kusaka addresses senior air commanders. "We must preserve combat strength," he states evenly. Avoid unnecessary engagement at disadvantageous altitude. Protect fuel reserves. Conserve aircraft. The directive is rational, but in the skies the Americans continue appearing first. Shock deepens into frustration among frontline pilots. Captain Yanagia sits in a dimly lit mess hall that evening, rain tapping against metal walls. Lieutenant Sasai joins him. They do not fight as we train, Sasai says. They do not honor the circle. Yanagia exhales slowly. They do not need to. Outside, mechanics inspect bullet holes in returning aircraft. Patterns reveal concentrated strikes along fuselage and engine compartments. The Lightning's centralized guns allow lethal accuracy at range. Desperate adjustments continue. Some pilots attempt high-speed diving attacks on P-38 formations before they can establish altitude advantage. Occasionally, a Lightning falls trailing smoke. Victories are recorded, but the overall pattern remains unchanged. The Americans dictate tempo. Confusion grows at higher command levels regarding long-term strategy. Reinforcements to forward bases now require heavier escort commitments. Shipping routes must account for potential fighter interception far from original battle zones. The psychological effect spreads beyond air units. Naval officers planning convoy movements must now consider high-altitude fighter cover from unexpected directions. The calm confidence of April feels distant. The realization has not fully crystallized yet. But desperation has entered the equation, and desperation rarely restores control. July 12, 1943. 5:40 a.m. Rabaul Harbor. The first light of dawn glints off the hulls of anchored transports and destroyers. Fuel barges drift slowly between piers. Anti-aircraft batteries sit alert along the shoreline, crews scanning the sky even before breakfast. The harbor once felt like a fortress. Now it feels like a target waiting to be measured. Inside the naval planning chamber overlooking the water, Vice Admiral Junichi Kusaka studies a revised operations chart. Red lines indicating transport routes have been redrawn repeatedly over the past weeks. Routes that once cut directly through Bougainville Strait now bend unpredictably, hugging coastlines and weaving between islands in an attempt to reduce exposure. Commander Hitoshi Miura stands beside him. Our original reinforcement schedule for the Northern Solomons cannot be sustained, Miura says quietly. Daylight movements invite interception. Night operations limit coordination and increase navigational risk. Kusaka does not respond immediately. He remembers earlier months when distance itself had served as a shield. Inspection tours, reinforcement flights, supply convoys had relied on geography. The Pacific had been vast enough to conceal movement. Now geography offers no comfort. July 15, 1943, 9:22 a.m., over Bougainville Strait. Captain Kenji Yanagia leads a defensive patrol of 10 Zeros. They climb cautiously, scanning for contrails. The sky is clear, almost serene. Below, a small convoy of barges and patrol craft attempts to move supplies northward. Radar stations report incoming bombers from the southeast. Moments later, the familiar twin-tailed silhouettes appear above the bombers. Lockheed P-38. Lightnings. But something is different this time. They are not merely escorting. They are ranging ahead of the bombers, sweeping aggressively across anticipated interception routes. Yanagia sees them before they see him. He signals a climbing attack, hoping to catch one element separated. The P-38 formation reacts instantly. Two Lightnings peel downward, forcing Yanagia defensive. Another pair dives on a trailing Zero, shredding it before its pilot can even transmit. The bombers continue unmolested for crucial minutes. Below, explosions ripple across shoreline installations. Supply dumps erupt into flame. One barge in the strait explodes as a near-miss ruptures fuel drums. The convoy scatters chaotically. The original Japanese plan had depended on predictable American escort limits. Bombers could be intercepted before reaching target. Transports could move during calculated daylight windows. Now those windows have closed. July 20th, 1943. Kahili Airfield. Fuel drums sit half empty. Replacement aircraft are fewer. Maintenance crews cannibalize damaged Zeros to keep others flying. In the briefing hut, tension is no longer subtle. Lieutenant Junichi Sasai points to a chalkboard diagram of altitude layers. They maintain two tiers of escort, high cover above bombers, lower sweep elements ahead. We cannot reach both simultaneously, another pilot mutters. Then we strike bombers first. Yanagiya shakes his head. If you dive through their lower sweep, the upper element will descend behind you. We have seen it repeatedly. The room falls quiet. The original plan for air defense in the Solomons had relied on a maneuver superiority and interior lines. Quick interception turning engagements, forcing enemy fighters low. That plan collapses when the enemy refuses to turn. July 28, 1943, 1:50 p.m., over the Solomon Sea. A large Japanese strike package attempts coordinated attack on Allied shipping supporting landings near New Georgia. The mission is ambitious. Dive bombers, torpedo planes, and heavy zero escort. Intelligence estimates limited American fighter presence. Instead, the strike force encounters an integrated screen of P-38 Lightnings already orbiting above the fleet. The Americans have anticipated the attack. They dive through the Japanese formation before bombers reach release point. One torpedo bomber disintegrates under concentrated fire. A second spirals downward, trailing smoke. Zeros attempt to shield them, but the Lightnings climb, regroup, and strike again. Bomb release becomes disorganized. Torpedoes enter water at improper angles. Dive bombers break off early. The strike fails. On return to Kahili, only fragments of the formation land. Yanagiya steps from his cockpit slowly. He removes his gloves, staring at blackened fingertips from cordite residue. Sasai approaches, face pale. "They were waiting," he says. That phrase echoes across operations rooms in the coming days. They were waiting. August 1st, 1943. Rabaul. Vice Admiral Kusaka convenes a closed meeting with senior air officers. "Our reinforcement strategy must adjust," he states. "We will reduce daylight transport, consolidate remaining aircraft at fewer bases, avoid unnecessary exposure. These measures are defensive, reactive, protective. The offensive posture once envisioned for the Northern Solomons has dissolved. American landings continue under heavy air cover. The P-38's extended range allows persistent fighter presence over contested waters. Japanese air units must choose carefully when to engage, conserving dwindling strength. The collapse is not a single explosion. It is erosion. Every mission now requires calculation of potential lightning presence. Every convoy departure must consider altitude sweep. Every inspection tour is reconsidered or cancelled. Captain Yanagiya stands alone beside the runway at Kahili one evening as the sun sinks into a blood-red horizon. The airfield is quieter now. Fewer engines roar at dusk. Fewer aircraft line the dispersal areas. He remembers the early laughter. The belief that the twin boom fighter was too large, too awkward. Now it dictates tempo across hundreds of miles. The original plan assumed that control of the sky would hinge on agility and spirit. It has shifted to endurance and reach, and the original plan lies in fragments scattered like debris across coral runways. August 18th, 1943, 6:12 a.m., Kahili, Airfield Bougainville. Low fog clings to the edges of the runway, turning the revetments into shadowed shapes. The coral strip bears scars from repeated bombardment patched unevenly. A reduced line of Mitsubishi A-6ME30s stands ready. Their paint is chipped, their panels mismatched from hurried repairs. Captain Kenji Yanagiya studies a new operations order. The directive is clear. Concentrate strength, avoid fragmentation. Force decisive engagement when numerical advantage permits. It is an attempt to reclaim initiative. In Rabaul, Vice Admiral Junichi Kusaka has authorized a coordinated fighter sweep intended to draw American escorts into a planned engagement zone north of Bougainville. The concept is precise. Smaller decoy formations will bait American bombers. Main fighter strength will wait at altitude, positioned to dive upon the P-38s when they commit. Commander Hitoshi Miura outlines the logic during briefing. If we can force them into sustained engagement, far from their base fuel limitations will constrain withdrawal. We will regain altitude control. The room listens carefully. The plan sounds sound. It restores symmetry to the problem. August 21st, 1943, 9:47 a.m., over the Solomon Sea. The decoy formation executes its role. A small group of Japanese aircraft approaches a suspected Allied supply corridor. Within minutes, radar detects inbound American bombers with escort. The trap is set. Yanagia and 15 Zeros hold above a broken cloud layer at 23,000 feet. Engines run hot. Oxygen masks seal tightly. They wait for the signal. Below P-38, lightnings appear in disciplined formation above the bombers. As expected, two elements peel off toward the decoy. Now Yanagia orders. The main Zero formation dives through the cloud ceiling. For a moment, surprise seems achieved. One lightning takes hits along its outer boom and rolls sharply. Another breaks formation abruptly. But the Americans react with practiced coordination. Additional P-38 elements unseen at even higher altitude descend rapidly. They had anticipated layered attack. Within seconds, the sky becomes a lattice of contrails and tracer fire. Yanagia engages a lightning head-on. He squeezes the trigger, 20mm shells flashing forward. The American returns fire with concentrated nose-mounted guns. Tracers streak past Yanagia's canopy in a tight cluster not dispersed from wingtips. He banks violently and climbs, attempting to force vertical separation. The lightning matches the climb. Both Allison engines roar evenly turbo supercharges, maintaining power at altitude. The Zero's climb rate falters near 25,000 feet. Another P-38 dives behind him. Yanagia rolls inverted and descends sharply, escaping narrowly. Below, the decoy formation disintegrates under renewed attack. The Americans do not remain beyond calculated margins. After brief but violent engagement, they regroup and withdraw eastward in coordinated pairs. Fuel exhaustion does not trap them. The trap fails. August 24th, 1943. Rabaul briefing chamber. Lost tallies are reviewed. 3 Zeros destroyed. 2 damaged beyond repair. No confirmed bomber losses inflicted. Vice Admiral Kusaka listens in silence. We underestimated their layered escort depth, Miura admits. They anticipate counter-concentration. Recovery attempts multiply. Night movements increase, but navigation errors grow frequent. Several transport aircraft are lost to weather or mechanical failure. Training hours shrink further due to fuel rationing. Replacement pilots arrive with minimal high-altitude combat exposure. September 2nd, 1943. 2:03 p.m. over Buka Passage. A concentrated Japanese fighter sweep attempts to strike American reconnaissance aircraft before escort arrival. Initial success seems possible. A lone reconnaissance plane is forced downward, then P-38. Lightnings arrive sooner than anticipated. They no longer respond passively. They patrol preemptively. One by one, Zeros are forced defensive. The Americans maintain altitude advantage and coordinated spacing. They refuse bait. Captain Yanagia lands at Kahili with his ammunition nearly expended and fuel gauge precariously low. He removes his helmet slowly. Lieutenant Junichi Sasai approaches, eyes tired. "We can no longer surprise them," Sasai says. Yanagia nods faintly. Attempts to recover lost control grow increasingly reactive. Commanders shift aircraft between bases to avoid concentrated bombing. Inspection tours are curtailed or cancelled entirely. Convoy routes hug coastlines in daylight and attempt open water under darkness. But the lightning's range continues to stretch the horizon of risk. September 10th, 1943. Rabaul Harbor. A small convoy attempts transit at dawn under heavy fighter escort. The sky appears clear. Radar reports no immediate contacts. Minutes later, high-altitude contrails form. The P-38s descend before escorts can fully climb. One transport explodes under concentrated fire. Escorting Zeros attempt to shield remaining vessels, but the Americans focus on engines and bridge sections with ruthless precision. Anti-aircraft batteries along the shoreline open fire belatedly. Tracers arc upward ineffectively. The convoy scatters. Recovery plans falter again. Inside Rabaul headquarters, maps now show shrinking zones of confident movement. Areas once marked secure are shaded uncertain. Vice Admiral Kusaka speaks quietly during evening briefing. "We must accept that air superiority in the Northern Solomons is contested beyond our ability to dictate." No one argues. Captain Yanagia stands outside his quarters that night, staring at distant lightning over the sea. The word itself now carries weight. Lightning, once dismissed as oversized, clumsy, vulnerable in a turn. Now it appears wherever calculations once provided comfort. The attempts to recover control reveal a deeper truth. Control was already lost when distance ceased to matter. And every new plan only confirms how far the balance has shifted. The morning sun rises through a haze of lingering smoke from previous raids. Anti-aircraft crews stand ready beside their guns, scanning the sky with restless precision. Radar stations along the coast track intermittent signals, uncertain whether they are weather echoes or approaching aircraft. Inside the operations chamber, Vice Admiral Junichi Kusaka studies the newest intelligence summary. American landings continue to push northward. Airfields that once felt distant are now within calculated reach of sustained escort coverage. Commander Hitoshi Miura enters quietly, carrying a fresh report. Enemy fighter sweep observed over St. George Channel at 0700 hours. Duration 45 minutes. No bombers present. Kusaka looks up slowly. No bombers. Miura shakes his head. Fighter sweep only. P-38 formations maintaining altitude above 24,000 feet. The significance settles heavily. They are not escorting. They are patrolling. October 8, 1943. 10:33 a.m. Over Bougainville. Captain Kenji Yanagiya leads a reduced formation of 6 zeros. Fuel constraints have limited sortie numbers. Replacement pilots are scarce. Weather is clear wind light from the southeast. Radar reports a large formation inbound from the southeast. Yanagiya climbs steadily, conserving fuel. As they approach 20,000 feet, contrails become visible. American bombers in disciplined formation, and above them twin-tailed silhouettes already positioned in layered altitude. The P-38s are early. Before the Zeros can even complete their climb, 2 Lightnings dive aggressively. Lieutenant Junichi Sasai reacts instantly, banking into the attack. He fires a burst that strikes a Lightning's wing root. The American rolls sharply, smoke trailing briefly, then stabilizes and climbs. Another P-38 dives from above Sasai. Concentrated fire tears through his fuselage. His Zero shudders violently. Sasai hit crackles over the radio. Yanagiya turns sharply, trying to intercept the attacker, but the Lightning is already climbing beyond reach. Below, bombers release payloads across Kahili's repair facilities. Explosions ripple through maintenance sheds. A secondary blast erupts as stored fuel ignites. Sasai's voice returns, briefly strained. I am descending. His aircraft spirals downward, trailing smoke toward the jungle interior. Yanagiya watches helplessly. The Americans withdraw methodically, once more climbing to altitude and turning southeast in disciplined pairs. They remain overhead for several minutes after bomb release, sweeping for any late interceptors. They are comfortable above Bougainville. Back at Kahili, the runway is cratered again. Flames consume what little reserve fuel remained in exposed drums. Yanagiya removes his helmet slowly, staring at the smoke columns rising into the sky. Inside Rabaul headquarters that afternoon, the cumulative picture can no longer be reframed as anomaly. Commander Miura spreads updated range charts across the table. Allied airfields now dot the southern and central Solomons. With each new base, the P-38's reach extends farther. Our defensive perimeter has collapsed inward, Miura says quietly. They now possess overlapping fighter coverage. Vice Admiral Kusaka nods once. The realization is not dramatic. It is precise. Distance can no longer be relied upon for concealment, inspection, reinforcement, or surprise. Every transit is potentially observable. Every daylight movement invites interception. October the 12th, 1943. 4:27 p.m. Over St. George Channel. A Japanese reconnaissance aircraft attempts to map Allied naval movements. It flies high, cautious. Within minutes, P-38. Lightnings appear above it as if summoned. The reconnaissance plane attempts evasive maneuver, but the Lightning's speed advantage closes the gap. A short burst of concentrated fire cripples the aircraft. It falls into the sea. No bombers had accompanied the Lightnings. They were already there. Captain Yanagiya reviews the report in silence. He remembers the early laughter, the belief that the twin-engine fighter would falter in tight turns, the assumption that external tanks would make it vulnerable, the conviction that distance ensured security. Now the sky itself feels altered. October the 20th, 1943. Rabaul. Vice Admiral Kusaka addresses senior staff with measured calm. We must accept that American fighter presence now extends across the northern Solomons with sustained endurance. Reinforcement by daylight is no longer feasible without unacceptable loss. No one challenges the statement. The moment of realization has arrived, not as a single explosion, but as a completed pattern. The lightning is no longer an intruder. It is a constant. And the Japanese defensive doctrine built on maneuver and distance has been overtaken by endurance and layered escort. Captain Yanagiya stands alone beside the darkened runway at Kahili that evening. Few aircraft remain operational. The jungle hums quietly beyond the airfield. He looks upward at the fading sky. There was a time when the horizon represented safety. Now it represents reach. And there is nowhere within that horizon the lightning cannot eventually appear. November 2nd, 1943. 6:11 a.m. Empress Augusta Bay, Bougainville. The sea is gray beneath a low ceiling of cloud. American naval forces maneuver in tight formation offshore, their decks alive with motion. Above them, faint contrails cut deliberate arcs through the sky. P-38. Lightnings patrol high overhead. Their presence is no longer tied to a single mission or target. They orbit as guardians, engines droning steadily, twin tails steady against the pale morning light. On the northern coast of Bougainville, what remains of Kahili airfield stands scarred and partially abandoned. Coral patches mark where runways once lay smooth. Fuel reserves are critically low. Replacement aircraft arrive sporadically, if at all. Captain Kenji Yanagiya walks along the edge of the runway, boots crunching on fractured coral. He pauses beside a grounded Zero with its engine cowling removed. The once elegant lines of the aircraft seem fragile against the changing sky. A distant rumble grows louder. Radar operators report inbound contacts. American bombers approach at high altitude, and as always now above them, the P-38s. The Zeros scramble, but fewer rise than in months past. Engines strain as they climb, but altitude comes slower, with worn components and cautious throttle settings. At 22,000 feet, Yanagiya sees them. Layered escort. Two elements, high cover, one sweeping forward. The Americans have perfected the pattern. He feels no surprise, only recognition. The Lightnings dive with calculated aggression, intercepting Japanese fighters before they can even align for attack on the bombers. Concentrated nose fire flashes like brief lightning strikes in the sky. One Zero explodes mid-air, another spirals downward, trailing smoke. Yanagiya attempts to force one P-38 into a horizontal turn. The American refuses climbing vertically instead. Another Lightning drops behind Yanagiya, traces streaking past his canopy in a tight cluster. He banks hard, barely escaping. Below, bombs fall on coastal defenses. Explosions ripple through ammunition stores and communications posts. Within minutes, the Americans withdraw eastward in disciplined formation. They leave not in haste, but in control. Later that morning in Rabaul, Vice Admiral Jinichi Kusaka studies casualty reports. Aircraft losses, fuel reserves, damaged installations. The strategic map before him tells a simple story. American forces are advancing northward under persistent air cover. Japanese bases are shrinking islands of vulnerability. The reach once dismissed has become the defining factor of the theater. November the 5th, 1943. 9:40 a.m. Rabaul Harbor. A massive American air raid strikes the anchorage. Carrier-based aircraft attack in waves, and once again, P-38. Lightnings sweep ahead, suppressing fighter response. Anti-aircraft guns fire continuously, black bursts dotting the sky. Yet American formations remain cohesive. Yanagiya and the few remaining operational Zeros attempt interception, but they arrive late and below altitude. The Lightnings engage first. One Zero disintegrates under concentrated fire before completing its climb. Another pilot breaks away fuel, nearly exhausted from the desperate ascent. The harbor burns. Destroyers list at anchor. Oil slicks spread across the water. The final understanding settles across command quietly. The early dismissal of the P-38 as too large, too clumsy, too unsuited for Pacific distances had delayed adaptation. The belief that maneuver alone would dominate had obscured the importance of endurance, altitude, and centralized firepower. Engineering had reshaped the battlefield. Drop tanks had erased distance. Turbo superchargers had preserved power at altitude. Layered escort tactics had transformed defense into dominance. November 12, 1943. Kahili Airfield. Only a handful of Zeros remain serviceable. Yanagia stands beside his aircraft at dusk, watching the horizon fade into darkness. He thinks of April, of laughter in the briefing hut, of the assumption that the twin boom fighter would never reach this far. He remembers the morning Admiral Yamamoto's bomber fell into the jungle. That had been the first undeniable sign. The scale of misjudgment had been visible even then. But doctrine shifts slowly. Pride yields reluctantly. Now the consequences are measured in burned airfields, lost convoys, fallen comrades. A final report arrives that evening. Daylight reinforcement flights to Bougainville are suspended indefinitely. The sky belongs to the enemy. Yanagaya removes his flight gloves and places them carefully on the wing of his aircraft. The metal is still warm from the day's sun. Above him, stars begin to appear. There is no speech, no declaration. Only the quiet understanding that the horizon once trusted has closed. And it is too late to reopen it.